Hi everyone. Today we're going to be doing an alcohol ink on Yupo piece, and I'm starting with a Lazy Susan that I've covered with Press and Seal. I found this to be an excellent product for this purpose because it's temporary. It can be ripped off after it gets too dirty or messed up, but in between it can certainly be easily wiped up with alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. I'm showing you two different types of Yupo. The first I've discarded. It's a wonderful product by Ranger, but the one we're going to use today is a translucent Yupo by Legion. It comes in 5x7 sheets, at least this pad. It comes in, they actually create various types. And I'm holding it very gently, and by the edges if I can. I've cleaned my hands really well with antibacterial soap which is alcohol in it. I don't want any residue on that Yupo paper because it'll act as a resist and the alcohol will not, or the ink rather, won't stay. I taped it down also on the Lazy Susan, as you can see, with Scotch tape. And I've got an alcohol wash in a small bottle using a 91% isopropyl alcohol solution from the drugstore. And that is what's in that little white bottle. The inks I'm using today are brand new to me. The first one I'm showing is Wild Plum. The second one is Raspberry. And then I have, that is Honeycomb, and Peach Bellini is the last one. I end up only using 3 of them. I don't use the Wild Plum, and I'll explain why in a while. And this is my craft dryer. It's actually a portable hair dryer. It's a 2-speed. I typically have it on low, and it is not a heat tool. It's not going to be used to heat set embossing powder or anything like that. It is strictly a hair dryer, so it's not going to burn skin. You want something quite, well, it can be warm. If you have a cool setting, that's even better, but you want something that's just going to allow you to move the ink and alcohol solution around. And so I start with the Peach Bellini. Again, these are new inks to me, so I'm getting an idea, because each color acts differently. I'm getting an idea of how they spread out. Most alcohol inks go into a circle like this one does. And it's just my habit to hit it with the craft dryer. That just serves to stop the ink from spreading beyond the page, which it almost started to do. And it's fine. I can bring it back onto the page later with a little bit of the alcohol wash. But in the meantime, I drop down a little bit of the raspberry ink. And again, just to get an idea of how it behaves. And you'll see in a moment, it behaves very differently than the Peach Bellini. And also I'm left-handed, so I should never try and turn a switch on with my right hand. So I'm showing you how differently it behaves. It just runs a little bit more. Not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, and you can see also there's a bit of a change in color. It almost goes from, when it's wet anyway, it goes from being that raspberry color to almost a magenta. And you'll see that as I'm dropping that alcohol wash, which again is a 91% isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol solution from the drugstore. And I put a little bit too much on. You should try and keep it very manageable. So for the first couple seconds here, I spend a bit of time, it's like herding cats, but I'm trying to keep that wash from going right off the paper, which would have the effect of me losing some of the pigment. I don't want to do that. But it is also mixed, as I pointed out, which is now on the left side, into quite a beautiful purple color. So the raspberry and that Peach Bellini have mixed a little bit. I'm also holding the hairdryer, in this case, straight up and down because I want to preserve that Peach Bellini color in the middle. And by holding the hairdryer perpendicular to the paper, that has the effect of moving the inks, the pigments away from one another and preserving the one that's right in the line of fire, if you will, of that blow dryer. So I've dropped a few more drops down. At this stage, I'm just sort of heading for the darker areas, because that tells me when it's dark that the pigments have collected in that particular dark place. So by dropping the alcohol onto those dark areas, the alcohol has the effect of breaking down the ink and allowing the pigment to move as I blow it around with the craft dryer. I could also be using a straw. I could actually be bending down and just blowing on it if I want to. That makes me a bit dizzy, so I don't do that. And also because alcohol and alcohol ink dry so quickly, using a straw can be wonderful, or just blowing on it if you have a very small place, and if you want a very controlled movement. And that's actually very helpful, especially toward the end of a project. And you can certainly do an entire project that way. I use the dryer on a low setting most of the time because it allows me to move those inks and colors much more quickly than I could with a straw. And again, because it dries and evaporates so quickly, I want as much movement as quickly as possible, so that I can really get those inks moved around before they dry, and they dry very, very quickly. And as you'll see, I'm moving that Lazy Susan around, and keeping the dryer pretty much aimed in the same direction. What's most important is it's aimed away from my face. I don't want to inhale the fumes. That's a very bad thing. You don't want the fumes collecting in your home anywhere. Ventilation and when you're using alcohol and alcohol ink is incredibly important. I can't even stress it enough. I have next to me in my studio, which is in the basement of my home in a summer kitchen, I have a stove with a hood fan that's vented to the outside. That is going full blast. There's also a bathroom fan right next to, the bathroom's right next to my studio area, and I have a fan in there also vented to the outside. And so with both of those fans going, I'm actually moving the alcohol fumes out and away from myself, which is again why I have the dryer facing away from me. But I'm also keeping it away from animals that I have in the home, including a bird, and birds do not handle fumes very well. Their breathing systems are very different than ours and other mammals. So if you've got small kids or people with bronchial issues or any of those things, please do think twice, if not three times, about whether that is a wise thing for you to be doing in your home. And if it is, please do use proper ventilation. If you don't have open windows right next to where you are working, or you can't work outside, which is a great thing too, that you have really excellent ventilation and can get those fumes away from the inside of your home and outside. So I just dropped in, the color I just dropped in was a honeycomb, which is a bit darker gold color than the peach Bellini was. And I was hesitant with it because, again, brand new color to me. I wanted to see how dark it was, and it is a fairly dark color for a gold. So I'm being a bit more careful, and I just placed it in the one area. And the other thing I want to see as I'm moving along is when it mixes with the colors next to it, what colors result. Sometimes they're very desirable colors and sometimes they're not. So if I just sort of practice and experiment a little bit on this one side, then I can see how well it's going to react with the colors around it. And as you'll see here, I've placed a couple more, I didn't even do drops, I just sort of scoots, if you will, of the color. And then I will go in with each of them with a little bit of ink. I don't use very much as I move through these pieces because there's just not as much needed. And also I want to preserve some of the areas that I've already created, so I want this to be quite controlled, as controlled as you can possibly get when you've got a dryer blowing air. And alcohol inks, which I won't say have a mind of their own, but almost. So what I'm also doing is, again, dropping the alcohol onto the darker places on the piece, which are places where the pigment from the inks that is there has deposited. And so the alcohol drops onto those deposited pigments, it breaks the pigments up, and it allows those pigments to move around as long as there's alcohol. And alcohol evaporates incredibly quickly, and so that means that the piece dries very quickly in between each of these. It's not like using watercolor. It's a very, very different, if you're not familiar with alcohol inks, because of the alcohol, it's just a very different medium to use. So very quick drying, as I pointed out. That's one of the reasons I like using the dryer. And as I just showed you there, I came straight down onto the ink where I wanted it to be very light, and I wanted to push the other colors away. So what I'm doing is creating as many dark and light places on this piece as I can, and that will give me the that feeling of movement, of shadow and light, which shadow looks like it's sort of receding or moving back, and light tends to look like it's coming forward. And so this is why you get the illusion of fabric, or I think silk scarves and smoke and clouds, and there's a number of different things that come to mind when I look at these different pieces that are created with what I call the alcoholic ink technique, and that is the placing of the alcohol on the ink, as I'm doing here on the Yupo, and moving it around. And in this case, I'm trying to cover, I don't do this on all the pieces, but on this piece, I wanted to cover all of the Yupo, which appears white here. And again, it's a translucent Yupo, but it does have a whiteness to it. And so I'm trying to cover that with even the very lightest washes of color, so that I will still get that appearance of light and dark, but none of the light will actually be the white Yupo. It will be very, very light pink or very, very light gold, or some combination of color that's come out, but in a very light way. And at the same time, as I say, there's going to be lines and places of darkness. And if what you're looking for is that movement, that scarf-like sort of fabric-like quality, then you're going to aim for a combination of dark and light. And so as I'm moving along in this piece, at this point I'm measuring in sort of my mind's eye the different colors that are there. Is there a balance that appeals to me? And how can I get those white places covered? I could just simply apply more alcohol to the piece and move around what's already there, but because there's so much pink and purple at this stage, I really want to introduce more of that gold tone. So now I've brought in more of the honeycomb. That's a little bit darker gold color. Oh, I beg your pardon, this is the peach Bellini. This is the lighter gold color. And I've placed that pretty much on every place on the piece that has white showing through at this point. I'm setting it just to keep those inks pretty much where they are, because I don't want them to move far. And as I was pointing out earlier, I'm using less and less of the alcohol, so it's coming out just in drops, and I'm placing them as closely as I can to right in the middle of the drops that I just put of the peach Bellini. And I'm still going to get some mixing going on, that happens. But where I don't want it to mix too much, you'll see here, if not this swoop over, the next one, where I'm going to try to preserve where that peach Bellini is, because I want it to really show in the midst of all those beautiful purple and pink hues. And so I'm moving the ink around. I still want to get that movement and make those circles of ink disappear and not be so distinct, but I also want the peach Bellini to stay, so I'm holding the dryer straight up and down. And it's having the effect of drawing the ink very quickly right underneath it and preserving that color, which was the peach Bellini. And it's also at the same time, and I'll be doing it a couple more times here so you can see, it's moving the other colors, which are the pinky tones, magentas and whatnot, away, and moving them so that I can actually identify or see the lighter yellow gold tones. And you saw me push the paper down on the corner. That's just because the Yupo was curling up a bit at the corner. You could tape right to the corners if you want. You can tape all four sides, corner to corner. I don't typically do that. Yupo doesn't curl too much. I had to hold it down in that one place because it was starting to curl up, and the ink would not have moved over all the white spots, and that, as I said, is my mandate. So I just wanted to move that that corner down so that the ink would flow and cover that corner up. And if you get alcohol ink on your hands, oh, some people find it very difficult to get off. I use an antibacterial soap because it's got alcohol in it. And so I just have that handy. And it's actually not an antibacterial soap, it's an antibacterial hand cleaner. So the hand cleansers that you would see, Purell or whatever, even in hospitals, it's got alcohol in it. You put a little bit on your hands and the ink will come right off. So the other option is you could wear some sort of gloves, latex gloves or something like that while you're doing the work if you don't want to get alcohol ink on you. That's not a comfortable way for me to do my work, but some people actually enjoy doing it that way. And you'll most definitely keep the alcohol ink off of your skin by doing it that way. And so again, I've placed a little bit more of the peach Bellini, and I really want to preserve that yellowness, the goldness. And so I've held the dryer for a moment there right over top of it, and it has the effect of preserving that yellow gold, and it moved all the pink away. So it's a practiced technique, but it's one that if you will experiment and practice, you'll come to understand how each of the colors behaves. And I've decided that that's a wrap, by the way. And that's part of the big question. When do you stop? We could all have the same paper with the same ink on it and the same alcohol wash, and we would still come up with very different pieces. Why? Because we make choices from moment to moment about where to blow on it, how much more ink or not, and when to stop. So I can't give you any tips there except to continue to watch as you're going along and occasionally stop, take a look at what you've done, and even take a picture and move it around and see what you think about it. This one I cut down into a 5x5 piece. I trimmed the original back so that I could mount it on a 5.5 by 5.5 inch square card. It almost looks like a path through a very interesting land, so always take the Scenic Route was the greeting that I chose to place on it. The mat, just so you know, is basil paper, cardstock rather. It's wild pansy. And I adhered the Yupo by placing the Yupo onto white cardstock, and for that I used some Sook Wang double-sided adhesive. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining me, and if you have any questions, please leave them below and I'll be happy to answer. Bye for now.